Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 275, and we're going to talk about Vivek Ramaswamy's tweet about American workers or engineers, generally speaking. So I'm going to quickly read his tweet and then give you my thoughts on the matter. Hopefully, it'll be a different perspective from what you're hearing from a lot of the reactionary posts that are floating around out there. In other words, it's more obviously it's a little bit more complex than what is being discussed, or at least I think so. So here's the tweet. I'm going to try to read it quickly. You can find it online anywhere. Anyway, the reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over native Americans isn't because of an innate American IQ deficit, a lazy and wrong explanation. A key part of it comes down to the C word, culture. Tough questions demand tough answers. And if we're really serious about fixing the problem, we have to confront the truth. Our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long, at least since the 1990s and likely longer. That doesn't start in college, it starts young. A culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. A culture that venerates Corey from Boy Meets World, or Zach and Slater over Screech in Saved by the Bell, or Stefan over Steve Urkel in Matters will not produce the best engineers. Fact. I know multiple sets of immigrant parents in the 90s who actively limited how much their kids could watch those TV shows precisely because they promoted mediocrity. And their kids went on to become wildly successful STEM graduates. More movies like Whiplash, fewer reruns of Friends, more math tutoring, fewer sleepovers, more weekend science competitions, fewer Saturday morning cartoons, more books, less TV, more creating, less chilling, more extracurriculars, less hanging out at the mall. Most normal American parents look skeptically at those kinds of parents. More normal American kids view those kinds of kids with scorn. If you grow up aspiring to normalcy, normalcy is what you will achieve. Now, close your eyes and visualize which families you knew in the 90s or even now who raised their kids according to one model versus the other. Be brutally honest. Normalcy doesn't cut it in a hyper-competitive global market for technical talent. And if we pretend like it does, we'll have our asses handed to us by China. This can be our Sputnik moment. We've awakened from slumber before, and we can do it again. Trump's election, hopefully, marks the beginning of a new golden era in America, but only if our culture fully wakes up, a culture that once again prioritizes achievement over normalcy, excellence over mediocrity, nerdiness over conformity, hard work over laziness. That's the work we have cut out for us, rather than wallowing in victimhood and just wishing or legislating alternate hiring practices into existence. I'm confident we can do it. Now, there are some components which speak something close to the truth, and at the same time, there's a lot of wrong too. So, as with all broad stroke generalities, as Vivek's tweet, you have something that resonates and a lot of stuff which offends. All right. I've seen a video where people talk about the H-1B visa for specialty occupations, but also include loopholes which allow outsourcing for U.S. jobs to low-cost foreign workers. Now, on the one hand, sure, okay, but on the other hand, there is a reaction by a lot of Americans to the kinds of people that they encounter in customer service. For example, like a lot of customer service centers were in India, And you could tell because of the accents of the workers who are handling a lot of these cases. Now, if they were not doing a good job, then people who were calling those centers were very loud to let people know their displeasure. And you saw a reaction, right? So more people hiring people or teaching maybe the Indians how to have a Southern accent or a distinctly American accent. But always the important factor is going to be the quality of the service that they provide. And so, in spite of the accent, if the quality of the service is satisfactory, then I think fewer and fewer people would complain. I saw another video about that had, was it 60 Minutes, where they were interviewing American workers who were displaced. They called it knowledge transfer. In other words, they were longtime workers, very good at their job, then told one day that they have to train the replacement worker, the worker who will then take their place. And the reason is obvious, right? These new workers are going to be paid less. So what does that mean? It's not a new phenomena, and it's interesting to me that a lot of people act so surprised, or maybe they are surprised, but then it also comes back to the American educational system, which is also one of the contributing factors that we have to talk about here. It's not going to be comprehensive, obviously. I have to fit this in 20 minutes. And this is sort of off the cuff kind of remarks that just came to mind as I was hearing things and reading Ramaswamy's tweet. All right, so this is not a new argument, new workers being paid less to replace and therefore upsetting and really making angry uh, older workers, established workers. You know, it used to be an argument, a cultural argument that was made in athletics, right? Why are there so many black basketball players in the NBA? Well, even though they're a minority in the United States, well, it's because of culture, right? Instead of fostering studying, a lot of young people are hitting the basketball courts or putting a lot of their time and effort into DJs. And so 20 years ago, when I was teaching in the university, they would say, oh, yeah, you go to a predominantly black school, and most of the kids that are there are talking about, growing up to get in the NBA or to be a hip hop, star. So it's a culture thing. At the same time, Asians were, discouraging people from listening to music and participating in sports and trying to get them to focus more on study, myself included, except I was, 30 years before that, right? So Asian mentality is largely the same, and I won't get into that historical component. I did have mentioned it before in other places where Asian society, the whole history of broad sections of Asia, the only way that you can rise in society is by studying and taking tests, right? So if you go over to Asia, I know particularly in Korea, that a lot of jobs uh, are you have to pass tests. It's a test-based society. And so if you're a bad test taker, there's no way you're going to be a lawyer or a judge or a doctor, right? Because the amount of material that is tested for is just insane. And so you are going to get certain people who are excellent test takers, people who have photographic memory, they are the ones who are going to rise to the top, right? And so, anyway, getting back to America, but this disdain for immigrant workers, is as old as time. I mean, uh, you had in the late 1800s, to be more recent, up through 1924, with the passage of the Johnson-Reed Act, uh, this negative view of immigrant workers. And the reason is because they were willing to work for less. In fact, that was the way for new immigrants to get established here in the United States. They would work for less. And so companies which took advantage of the lower cost labor were able to prosper even more, right? And the people who disliked it the most were, of course, union organizers, right? You can't organize a union, right, having all the workers come together to fight for higher wages if there were a lot of other people willing to work for even less money. And so that's why you had the Johnson-Reed Act, an immigration law which was based on quotas to restrict the number of people who were coming into the United States. Now, it was a dramatic change in the numbers. And some people have drawn a connection between this immigration law and the Great Depression, which then hits the country a few years later, right? Because you essentially stopped the flow of cheap labor, which was a big hit on the economy. And so what happened to all of those higher paid workers anyway? They all lost their jobs. And so, when you mess with economics and when you mess with the free choices that people want to make, you're going to have very, very serious repercussions in society. Okay, so what's going on? So you have Vivek Ramaswamy talking about, um, how American society seems to be valuing certain traits in our schools, which have very little to do with academics. And because of this, you're going to have more qualified engineers, candidates for high-tech jobs coming from other countries. That is not necessarily false, right? I mean, it's obvious that, yes, this is what's happening. I've talked about it before, how you can go to medical schools, and in the first year classes, you'll see very, very few American-born medical students, right? I remember reading a story where a white father stood up and said, "Excuse me, was there a separate orientation for white students?" Right? Because that person's daughter was the only white student in the entire incoming class of that particular medical school. And I've talked about this all the time in college, where a lot of American students want to major in political science as opposed to an actual science, right? Where they want to major in some sort of humanities major where they can just sit around and talk all day long, as opposed to hitting the books and studying math or something more technical. So this is not untrue. Okay, but there's also, we're missing something too, which might be able to diffuse some of the things that are going on. Okay, so US workers, because they're able to be replaced by lower cost workers, it basically means that US workers are overpaid for the job that they do. Okay. And so and to repeat, when there are workers who are willing to do it for less, then you are by definition overpaid. Okay. Why would anyone pay you more than is required? Right. It's sort of like going shopping for a shirt. Okay. And you see two shirts exactly the same with different labels. One is three times the cost of the other. Right. So really what you're doing is you're paying for the label. So you're overpaying for the actual shirt. What you're paying for is the label. And if it means that much to you, fine. But most people, right, and society has borne this out, most people will pay for the lower cost shirt, which is exactly the same as the much, much higher cost shirt. I knew I was overpaid, as a college professor, even though, elementary school, public school teachers were getting paid, two, three times more than what I was making. I knew that I was kind of overpaid, right? I knew it. And I knew that if I got a raise, I'd be a bigger burden for the university. And so I would always pass on raises. I would never apply for merit because I knew I would become more expensive to the university. And in fact, if I had the opportunity and someone told me we have to cut your contract because, you're too expensive, if I was able to, I'd go up to the dean's office and say, cut my salary, cut it by 33%, and just give me, extend my contract. Right. I would do that at the drop of the hat. And while I was, while I was under contract, I would look for another job. Right. And that's just the nature of the beast, and for people who have gotten used to the system, who somehow think that they are somehow more privileged or they deserve to be paid more. Well, you got to convince the people who are signing the check. What we also have to consider is that, um, you know, who is to blame? Is it the company that needs to be blamed for replacing high cost workers with lower cost workers? No, it's the laws and regulations which restrict competition and, more importantly, innovation, right? It's those things, that phenomena, laws and regulations passed by politicians, at the request of large global corporations, right? They're the ones who push the lawmakers to pass these laws which restrict competition and innovation, right? And how do they do this? Well, they have industry standards. They pass all of these standards. They say it's for safety, right, and for quality assurance. But really, what it is, it's a killer of innovation. It is a killer of creativity and change, right? And so everyone has to do it in the same way. That's what industry standard means. And so there is no opportunity to do something better where the industry has set a standard. And so competition becomes a lot easier domestically, right? And so this is why you're going to have tariffs and you're going to have trade sanctions and restrictions because you can no longer compete with other countries who have none of these restrictions, regulations, and protections for domestic workers. And so, with all of these regulations, you begin to see this attitude that jobs must be protected over innovation. So you sacrifice innovation for job security, right? And which is kind of interesting because this is a Marxist concept, right? Marx in the Communist Manifesto complains about this constant innovation, which forces workers to constantly have to, retool or relearn skills or learn new skills. And why should workers have to do this, right? Just keep everything the same. That way, workers can become lazy and never have to do anything different. That's a Marxist argument, okay? And so anyone who, wants to push back against this, well, you're a Marxist, right? You're making a Marxist argument. And because of all these restrictions that are put into place, yeah, right. Well, then now you have to seek other ways to cut costs, and that's outsourcing, right? Workers in other countries are going to be able to do the same job for less. And so you're going to shut down your factory here and ship your factory overseas, right? Because you haven't improved a tech, you haven't improved the methodology or technology. And if you did, like if you wanted to bring in more robots, but you can't because the union here in America prevents you from doing so, well, then you close the factory and you put the factory overseas with all of the robots and you train the workers to be able to maintain the factory that way, right? So that in a nutshell, very simply, that's really what's going on. And so the anger is being directed at the wrong person, right? Government should be the target of a lot of this complaining. Also, we have to remember that the educational system is also to blame, where a lot of people, we go through this educational, like my kids, are hardly were hardly challenged by the educational system in high school and elementary school. Like I constantly ask them, you know, did they do their homework? And they said they finished it at school. Personally, I had so much homework when I was younger. I just never bothered to do it. It was just so much. It was endless. But these days, right, I guess because of the standardization and the no child left behind, you got to, target a much lower standard so that academically lower students or developmentally slower students can keep up with everybody else. But of course, what are you going to do with all these smart kids who finished all their homework? Well, they're going to do extracurricular activities like sports, right? And so sure, getting straight A's is not a big deal anymore. So now it's straight A's and the sports, right? And so then you get that all-American kind of label. And so you see a lot of that as well, right? And so the educational system also has to be blamed for, the sort of lowering of the standards, right? And also, we have to keep in mind the Fed, which fuels and makes possible a lot of the misallocation of resources. And so, a lot of people, for example, a lot of bright people I taught in college, their job wasn't engineering. Psh, why do that? You don't make a lot of money. But if you become a stockbroker, wow, you can, make lots of money. And the stock market becomes a lucrative option because of all the money printing, right? All the inflation goes into the stock market, right? So this component also, I'm sure Vivek knows this too. It's just that he didn't put it in the tweet. And a lot of people are just losing their dookie because of that, right? So what Vivek also doesn't see, is, I'm sorry, it's getting a little bit long, but what Vivek doesn't see is that freedom is the key. It's not this overemphasis on engineering, right? Like, sure, you can have an Asian mindset. I grew up Asian, right? I know plenty of Asian families, and, my parents always were kind of disappointed in me that I didn't have the same Asian mindset that they did, and a lot of other Asians had. Like, why can't you be like that person, right? Because they focused only on studying. And, as I mentioned before, I had a lot of identity issues that I had to resolve first before I could, commit myself and focus on studying. But let's just say everyone then has tiger moms, right? Everyone adopts that Asian mindset, okay? Well, it's easy for him to say because clearly he either has a photographic memory or he's a freaking genius, okay? He is one of the successful ones. But what about everybody else, right? There are millions, millions of other Asians who can't compete with the Viveks of the world. So what are they doing, right? So they tried to be an engineer. What are they doing now? They're driving a taxi cab, right? There are no other options for people like that. And that's the problem. Like you go to a lot of these Asian countries and it's actually pretty depressing. You have so many cab drivers that are college graduates, right? Because the system, the society is not set up in a way where people can exploit creativity, where they can start and have new ideas. Everyone has to feed into the existing system. So, for example, Samsung, that one company, is last time I checked, which was about, I don't know, like 10 years ago, perhaps, was 60% of the economy. One company was 60% of the entire country's economy. I mean, come on. And so, how many engineers are they going to employ? Not that many. And they are going to employ only the best, a handful every year. And so, if everyone was studying to be an engineer and only a handful of them make it, what happens to the rest of them? And that's a question that is not addressed when you start having everyone getting that Asian mindset. Also, that mindset, that Asian mindset, is success according to the rules, right? And I've talked about this before in Pierre Bourdieu's field and rules theory. But the field that we live in, the country, if there are a certain set of rules that you have to play by in order to be successful, right? If everyone followed those rules, there is nothing else. There's little creativity, right? And there is a greater tendency to support the status quo. And that's why you can see all of these so-called smart people buying into the political rhetoric. That's why you see so many people trying to be political scientists, right? Majoring in political science when they go to college, right? Because they want to be part of the system. They want to support the system. They want to support the status quo where there is no change. In other words, our society is, geared towards being conservative, where there's very little change. And just because you focus on engineering doesn't mean that you will get that kind of creativity. Instead, you'll get a different kind of status quo, right? Because the rules can't change. I said that before when I was teaching an honor section, and I said, yeah, let's just blow up all the rules and requirements like patent laws, intellectual property, and they all lost it, right? They just got so upset because then they were like, there's no way I can make money, right? There's no way I can get a job, right? If you change everything now, then what am I studying for? And that's really what's going on. Um, at once upon a time, I saw that the number of engineering majors that graduated in any given year in China, in all of China, the total of engineering grads is far greater than all of the college grads in the United States. Wow. Okay, how are we going to compete? And that's why Ramaswamy, Vivek, he makes that comment about China handing America its butt, you know. Well, look, I mean, not all of them are going to get a job. You know, the competition in that kind of world is so insane. You know, you're going to have a lot of mental stress. You know, you're going to have lots of suicide. You know, you're going to have a lot of disappointed people, you know, and that's the other side of it that is not really discussed. And so what is the solution? Freedom, of course. Freedom is the answer. Freedom fosters competition and creativity for far better solutions, right? So Vivek is saying basically, well, everyone has to start becoming engineers. No, that that is another top-down kind of sort of mandate, right? And there are a lot of people who are going to scoff at that, right? But a far better solution is more freedom. And in order to have more freedom, you got to downsize government. You got to get rid of government, get rid of all these regulations, get rid of all this industry standard kind of thing, right? So on the one hand, I get what Vivek is trying to say, that there is a misallocation of value, right? In the same way that resources are misallocated. Well, then it translates into people valuing, right, and elevating and glorifying the wrong thing. Sort of like dying in a war. You know, that should never be valued. That should never be elevated as being something great when you have alternatives, right? Like someone who invented, a cure for what is it, Alzheimer's, right? You know, that is so much better than dying in a war, I would think, right? Um, so I get what Vivek is trying to say, but I would have avoided all of this controversy by just simply advocating cutting government, right? Because if you cut government, then you get rid of all these regulations and restrictions, and people have their freedom back, and they themselves get to figure out the best way to flourish, right? And the way Vivek is doing it, he's just simply giving fuel for all the Marxist pro-worker types. Like, you know, I love Jimmy Dore's, a lot of his stuff that he says, but when he starts talking about the worker, yeah, he's a Marxist, okay? And that's the thing. You don't want to give support or legitimize that kind of subjectivity, right? Because it ultimately will give you the same thing, different beneficiaries, but the same phenomena, same stagnation, the same conservatism, right? And in reality, all of us are workers. We're all workers, right? And so how we choose to work and what our choices are, that should be the focus, right? And it should be a very difficult focus, right? And difficult because all of us have the freedom to choose ourselves and understanding that all of the consequences is totally our responsibility. And so this freedom is it's always going to be the answer, and this freedom to create, to discover, to innovate, um, uh, to increase productivity, to come up with something better. I mean, this is something that we have forgotten. That is, in fact, what has made America great. And I hope that more people will remember that lesson. That's it. Sorry for going a little bit long, but it was a very important and big topic. I will talk to you guys next time.